Welcome to tonight's story. Before we begin, if you haven't done so yet, don't forget to click like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on interesting and relaxing stories in the future. And now, let your soul relax, your body gently relax, and let this story take you into a mysterious but fascinating space. Imagine you are sitting in your office late at night. The building was quiet, without a sound. Only the sound of the wind blowing gently through the window and the sound of the air conditioner operating. You're the only one left here, grinding away at the end of the day, spreadsheets and reports popping up on your computer screen. But suddenly, a light sound rang out, like a small laugh. You stopped, feeling like something was changing in the air. At first you thought you heard wrong, but the sound continued to echo, each time clearer. You turned around, looked around the room, and realized you were no longer alone. You don't know for sure what's going on, but one thing you can feel. There's something in this space other than you. You were the only person on the 14th floor of Riverside Corporate Center at that time. Strange noises begin to appear from the conference room, a place you know no one else can enter after office hours. Everything started as a harmless joke, but then the door to the conference room opens and you hear strange sounds. You wonder if you're caught up in a dream, but as you approach the conference room door, you notice that the door is unlocked. This can't be right since you're the only one with the key card to open that door. With each step, your feeling of insecurity increases. You can't understand why the meeting room is open for no reason, and you can't even explain the strange sounds coming from inside. The giggles rang out again, this time clearer than ever, and then you hear footsteps. Light but inexplicable footsteps, as if someone is quietly watching you from behind. When you enter, everything becomes chaos. A thick darkness covers the room, and you feel the presence of inexplicable entities. You can't understand why, but something is trying to pull you into the darkness. The sounds, the images, all were indeterminate, as if you were trapped in a never-ending nightmare. You run, leaving everything behind. With each step, the strange sounds became clearer. You run into the elevator, but for some reason, the elevator doesn't move. Stand still, cannot open the door. Outside, figures appear, walking through the hallway, with thin hands reaching out from the darkness, wanting to pull you in. You try to escape, but it's as if every door leads to the same place. The 14th floor is no longer a workplace, but a living nightmare. You clearly feel the presence of invisible entities, but you cannot turn back to look. You just want to get out of there, no matter what's chasing you. When you finally get out, you know you've escaped. But the story doesn't end there. 2 days later, you receive a call from the building manager, informing you that the 14th floor is being renovated, and workers have discovered a secret door buried behind a plaster wall, a door that no one knew about. The truth behind this story gradually emerges. Everything you have experienced is not an imagination. The sounds, the figures, all related to something long buried. And when you start researching the building, you discover a dark history you didn't know about. That door was sealed long ago, and what lies behind it may not be human. Part 1. The first night, the beginning of fear. The story begins with the main character who is an office worker working late on the 14th floor of Riverside Corporate Center. This office is very quiet at night, and he feels that the silence helps him concentrate on his work. But that didn't last long. At 11:47 p.m., as the dim light from the office's fluorescent lights brightened, a chuckle echoed in the air. At first, the main character thought he heard wrong, but the laughter became clearer. He began to feel a strange uneasiness, since he was the only person on this floor after the cleaning crew left and security checked the area at 8 p.m. However, the laughter did not stop. He slowly left the desk, trying not to make any noise, and headed towards the main meeting room. The meeting room door had been tightly closed since morning, and there was no reason for it to be open at this hour. When he pressed his ear to the door, he could hear indistinct whispers, as if someone was talking in the room. However, no one can enter this room after working hours. He checked his key card again and was confident that the door wouldn't open, but the surprise was, the door wasn't locked at all. At this point, fear began to escalate. He no longer felt as calm as before. The feeling that something was wrong, that something was watching him gradually spread throughout his body. But he couldn't understand what was going on. He decided to open the door and enter. Part 2. Entering the darkness. When the door opened, cold air hit his face, and the meeting room became strangely silent. He could feel the thick silence, but couldn't make sense of the tension in the air. The lights in the meeting room were still off, but through the dim window, the light from the hallway lights reflected the dim shadows in the room. He walked inside. His feet felt heavy, as if something was hindering his progress. His eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness, and then a soft sound rang out, as if someone was walking in the room. He turned around but saw no one. The giggling began again, this time clearer and closer. It was no longer a happy laugh but had become a strange, creepy sound, as if someone was trying to suppress their own laughter. He turned around and realized that the meeting room was not only empty, but also had the presence of something else, something that could not be explained by reason. A vague darkness undulated, as if there were creatures moving behind the wall. He immediately ran outside, panting, and his sense of safety began to fade. Everything around him begins to change. Unexplainable noises and strange figures began to appear in every corner, making it impossible for him to calm down. Part 3. Revealing the truth secrets behind the door. The next day, after he had tried to forget what had happened, he received a call from the building manager. The manager announced that the 14th floor was being renovated, and during the work, they discovered a secret door behind a plaster wall. This door is not recorded in the building's records. It was sealed decades ago. He felt a strong curiosity but also anxiety. Unable to believe his eyes, he began to research more about the building's history. This building was once the workplace of some strange people, and the story of the secret door seems to be related to scary events that happened at the end of the last century. While researching, he discovered several reports of disappearances and deaths in this building. This secret door may contain a truth that no one dares to face. And one thing that frightened him even more, the shadowy images he saw in the darkness of the conference room yesterday. Perhaps they weren't random figures, but trapped souls. Part 4. Worst night, unexplained entity. On another night, he decided to return to the office again, this time during the day, when there were many people around. But again, the presence of darkness still seemed to follow him. He couldn't deny the feeling that the creatures he had seen yesterday were still watching him. The meeting room door is no longer closed. He walked in and immediately felt a strong, inexplicable presence. Suddenly, the lights in the room suddenly lit up, illuminating every dark corner. The shadows moved constantly, flowing out of the walls, reaching out into space as if they were avoiding light. But when he looked closely, one of the shadows did not move and began to slowly approach him. He couldn't breathe, his heart beat faster. The shadow came closer, and just a second later, it stopped, stood still, and then a chuckle rang out, this time creepy, inexplicable. Part 5. The Coming of Darkness. He stood motionless, unable to take his eyes off the dark shadow moving slowly towards him. The whole space seemed to be suffocated by its presence. The chuckle sounded harmless at first, but gradually became terrifying, as if some entity was mocking his fear. He felt a coldness invade his entire body, and despite his instinct to run away, his body could not move. As the shadow got closer, he began to realize that it wasn't just an invisible shadow moving, but maybe it was a living entity, something his eyes couldn't fully see. Blurred shapes kept passing through space, and every time he turned away, they appeared somewhere else, moving closer at an unbelievable speed. The shadow stopped just a few steps away from him, right next to the table in the conference room. Suddenly, the space in the room changed completely. The shadows in the room seemed to undulate and stretch out like long, invisible fingers reaching out from every corner. He can feel them even though they don't touch him. That's when the shadow let out a louder chuckle than ever before. This laughter was no longer human. It had an overtone of madness, as if the entity's existence had lasted for centuries without change. He tried to turn back, but when he saw the meeting room door, he realized he couldn't leave here. The door remains closed, but cannot be opened. The lighting system in the hallway also began to flicker nonstop. The weak light from fluorescent lights is not enough to illuminate the entire space. Everything around him became blurry and gloomy. Part 6. The Secret of the Sealed Door. When he woke up, it seemed like it was all just a dream, but that fuzzy feeling and strange presence still didn't let go. He left the building the next morning, but daylight could not erase the darkness in his mind. Everything in the meeting room remains the same, except for one thing. There is a secret door behind the plaster wall, but until now no one has been able to explain why it was sealed for a long time. The next day he returned to the building, this time not to work, but to learn about that door. The building's history seemed to be a series of strange and mysterious events, and he felt like he had discovered an important part of it. He reread old documents, but couldn't find any information about that door. The strange thing was that every time he learned more about the building's history, he felt the presence of something else in the room. The giggles, the strange footsteps, all made him feel unable to escape the trap that the building had set for him. He decided to continue investigating, and during one of his surveys, he found a diary entry from people who previously worked at the building. It records strange events that happened in the 80s when the building was built. There was one part in the diary that especially startled him. Floor 14 is not a place for normal people. The things in the darkness there are not human. Be careful when you go through the sealed door. This made him begin to suspect that something was threatening him. Could this secret door be the cause of all the strange phenomena he has experienced? And are the shadows trying to escape from behind that door? Part 7. The door opens footsteps of the past. He decided to come back late one night when there was no one in the building and try to open the secret door. He knew that he might be in danger, but his curiosity and strange fear made him unable to resist. The door has been sealed for many years, and no one dares to open it. That night, he found his way to the meeting room where it all began. He could feel the tension in the air, the presence of some force watching his every move. He approached the secret door and used his hand to unlock it. When the door opened, a cold wave hit his face, as if this door led to another space. Not here. He stepped inside, and all he saw was a dark, endless hallway. His footsteps echoed in the empty space, as if there was no end. He went deeper inside, and every feeling of fear seemed to increase. The wall around him began to change, deforming into strange shapes, as if this space no longer belonged to the human world. And then, a strange light emanated from the end of the hallway, causing him to come closer. As he approached the light, a shadowy figure appeared. It was a woman, standing in the middle of that space. The light from her was like a source of strength attracting him. He tried to run, but his legs couldn't move. She opened her mouth, and from it came a terrible laugh, an unforgettable laugh. "Welcome home," she whispered. "This is our place." Part 8. Facing the final choice. He couldn't move, but he could feel that he wasn't the only one here. A pull from the darkness began to invade his body. Her presence is not just a ghost, but a part of this space. He stands between life and death, between past and present. What will happen next? Can he escape from here and free himself from this nightmare? And the secret door, is it an invitation into another world, where everything will change forever? Part 9. Painful decisions. He stood silently in the darkness, clearly sensing that it was not just him and the darkness of this room. Something else existed in this space, something invisible, but it was moving, following his every move. The figure of the woman before him was no longer a physical entity. She is like a ghost, a soul imprisoned between dimensions. The light from her body flickered, unstable, as if she could only exist for brief periods of time, before fading into darkness once again. "This is our place," she repeated, but this time, her voice was no longer warm or welcoming. It serves as a warning, bringing with it the invasion of truth. You can't escape this place. We're all here, trapped in this darkness. We're just waiting for someone to find out the truth. He couldn't fully understand her words, but a strong feeling rose in his heart. This building is no ordinary place. The 14th floor is not an office building like many other buildings. It is a place of imprisoned souls, where death and life strangely blend together. He felt like he was being pulled towards her. All senses seemed to be dulled, and a powerful force as if from darkness enveloped him, pushing him into the final moment of awakening. He felt her cold hand reach out and touch his shoulder. Immediately, an electric shock-like feeling ran through his body. He felt like he was being sucked into an endless void, unable to escape. That can't be happening, he thought to himself, but everything seemed beyond his control. With every step toward her, he felt a little more about the cost of curiosity, the cost of trying to solve unexplained mysteries. And then, the laughter rang out again, this time no longer pleasant. It was like a scream of indignation, the sound of souls that could never be released. Part 10: Journey into the Past. He felt himself being pulled into another space, not a meeting room anymore, but a dark area, like an endless hallway. The walls around him were not made of concrete or plaster as he thought, but were black stone columns, full of cracks, as if they had existed for thousands of years. Every step he took echoed strangely in the silent space, creating inexplicable sounds. His steps were slow, his eyes squinted, trying to adjust to the darkness. As he approached the end of the hallway, a door appeared, like a broken stone wall, leading into a room filled with pale light. But this light did not come from electric lights or from the sun, but from a strange light source, from somewhere deep in the darkness. He entered the room, and the first thing he noticed were strange images, paintings on the walls, ancient symbols, but the strange thing was that they all looked at him with unmistakable eyes. In this space, time no longer has meaning. He could feel that he was no longer in the real world, but in another space where the past and present were intertwined. A creepy feeling began to rise as he realized that everything in this room was designed to keep him there. A trap. He couldn't move, couldn't run. He felt like he was trapped in the very memories and mysteries that he had searched for, but was not prepared to face. Part 11. The Terrible Truth Imprisoned Souls. The girl had been standing silently, but the light from her body was now shining more strongly. He couldn't turn back, couldn't escape her hypnosis, and from her eyes he could see something horrifying. In her eyes there were blurred images of other people. People who had passed through this place, souls who had been imprisoned in this building, and now they were waiting for someone new. He felt as if he was sinking into a quagmire, unable to get out. The images in the girl's eyes gradually became clearer. He saw souls trapped in the walls of this room. Images of those who died long ago, those who perished in this building. Now only the suffering souls remain, unable to escape. And they all have one thing in common. They all come from previous discoveries, people who were curious and opened this secret door, but were eventually swept into an eternity of darkness. "You won't be able to leave," she said, and her words were like a curse. "We are souls left behind, imprisoned in this darkness, and so will you. Each of us is a part of this space, inescapable." He felt cold sweat break out, and a cold wind ran down his spine. But in this moment, he realized something. These spirits are not ordinary ghosts. They were people who had once been him, people who had experienced this fear, people who had been caught up in the eternal whirlwind of curiosity. Part 12, Final Choice. The terrible truth he had to face was everything he was experiencing was just a loop. Every curious person, every person who seeks to decipher these mysteries ends up the same, caught in a never-ending vortex. The secret door is not a way out, but a trap, and he is the next one who will be trapped here, in an eternal loop, part of the darkness. With each passing moment, he realizes that perhaps salvation does not come from opening that door, and a painful decision must be made, to keep the faith and find a way out or to be swept away into eternity, as those souls did. Part 13. Obsession coming from the other side. When I tried to step back from the handrail, the cold feeling from the metal didn't seem to let me go. It spread through each finger, as if there was some force holding me back, forcing me to face the darkness that was looking at me from the reflection. I knew that no matter what I did, my reflection would still follow me, like an inescapable ghost. It felt strange, as if I was no longer completely here, but a part of me was trapped in another world through the mirror. The reflection's smile grew wider, its mouth moving with words I couldn't hear. Every time I tried to look closer, the image in the mirror changed. Its eyes began to shine, cold and calculating, as if it knew my every thought. And when it looked at me, I felt a strange presence, a feeling as if I was no longer myself. I can't understand what's going on. The coldness of the metal under my hands seemed to be the result of a curse, something I couldn't explain rationally. My mind told me that this was just a hallucination, a result of stress and lack of sleep, but my feelings argued against it. I can't move, can't get out of this place. I stood there, in a dark space, where I couldn't distinguish between reality and illusion, between my reflection and myself. When I tried to scream, no sound came out. The reflection's lips still moved, but this time I could see clearly it wasn't just a reflection anymore. It is like an independent entity existing in its own space. Its lips opened wide, saying something I couldn't understand. Is it warning me? Or are you waiting for me to do something? No, I can't let it control me. In a moment of desperation, I turned around and hurriedly walked out the stairs, trying to escape the reflection that was following me. But when I turned around, I couldn't believe my eyes. That figure was no longer just in the mirror. It appeared right in front of me, standing right in the hallway, just a few steps away from me. I couldn't breathe. My body was stiff. That figure was no longer smiling. It stared at me, as if knowing exactly what I was thinking, what I was feeling. In that moment, I realized something horrifying. This figure was no longer me. It was an entity, a part of another world that I could not understand. And now it was approaching me, step by step, as if it had taken over my body, my mind. Part 14, Learning New Things. I stood motionless, unable to turn around. All my thoughts were disordered, no longer able to distinguish between truth and illusion. The figure was approaching, closer and closer, as if I couldn't avoid this encounter. The cold feeling from it invaded not only my body but also my mind. It was showing me something I couldn't understand, but I knew I was prepared for it. It's not just a ghost. It is a part of me, a part that has been buried, forgotten in a dark corner of my mind. You're ready to learn, a voice said, but this time it wasn't from me, but from the reflection itself. I cannot resist the truth it is presenting. Old memories and lessons that I had been forced to forget suddenly came flooding back. Teachings about other worlds, about the places we come from and return to. Secrets that I had forgotten were now gradually revealed, but I no longer wanted to know. I just want to get out of this place, out of this darkness. But that figure wouldn't let me go. It just stood there, looking at me with eyes full of understanding and patience. You will understand when the time comes, it said, and then it felt like something in my mind was being opened. I can feel the truth slowly pouring in, not from this world, but from another world, a world where shadows like these have lived and waited for centuries. Part 15, The Price to Pay. Unable to bear it any longer, I turned around and ran, running away from that darkness, running away from the reflection that was chasing me. I can't look back. I can't face it anymore. But I know, no matter how far I run, that figure will always be behind, ready to teach me lessons I'm not ready to understand. And when I looked in the mirror again, I knew I wouldn't be myself anymore. That darkness will forever follow me, taking over parts of my mind that I cannot control. Part 16, Endless Haunting. I couldn't avoid looking at my reflection in that mirror. Every time I turned around, that reflection moved in an inexplicable way, like an intangible shadow, always following me, always watching me. But what's more strange is that I can't escape the feeling of being stared at by my own shadow. Not only that, everything around me also seemed to become a part of this world with no escape. That darkness is not just something I see in the mirror. It had begun to take over the space around me, from the walls, the floor to the dark corners of the room. Every night, when I walked through the hallway, I could feel that presence. Not just in the reflections, but in the air itself, as if the space had been distorted, filled with darkness. That night, As I walked with Tom and Sarah through an empty room in their new house, I saw it again. The mirror reflected something I couldn't make out. A shadowy object moving in the low light from Tom's phone flashlight. The reflection in the mirror was out of sync with our movements. It made me feel like I had fallen into a parallel world where everything was spiraling out of control. I felt a shiver run down my spine when I realized that what I was seeing in the mirror wasn't me anymore. The shadow was moving independently, as if it had a life of its own. And when I tried to see more clearly, I saw that I was not the only one trapped in that mirror. There are other reflections, other people, shadows that never leave. We couldn't do anything but leave the room. My feeling at that time was like something was chasing me, and every time I looked back, the image in the mirror smiled at me, as if knowing all my thoughts and feelings. Tom and Sarah looked at each other with worried expressions, and I understood that they, too, felt the strangeness surrounding us. We left the house and never came back. But I know that shadow doesn't just stop in the mirror. It followed me out, it followed me home, and I couldn't escape it. Part 17, the feeling of can't escape. In the days that followed, I could no longer live peacefully. Every time I look in the mirror, I see small changes. Sometimes the shadow in there smiled smugly. Sometimes it just stood silently, looking at me as if waiting for something. Every time I look into my eyes in the mirror, I can't help but feel that it's not me looking back at me, but someone or something watching me. I couldn't stop thinking about that shadow, about the other reflections, about whether I really was trapped in another world. A world where the reflections were not me anymore but entities that existed independently, inexplicably. I couldn't tell anyone about what was happening. There was nothing I could do to explain myself, and no one could understand the turmoil in my mind. Only I know that that shadow is still watching, always waiting, always looking for an opportunity to draw me into its world. I don't know what to do anymore. Every night, when I try to sleep, I can't escape the feeling that that shadow is still near, still in the mirror, still watching me. But I know one thing. No matter where I run away, that shadow will always stay, will always watch, will always find a way to return. And this time, I'm not sure I have the strength to fight it. Part 18, Footprints from the Darkness. The footprints in the mud were still there, as clear and perfect as if they had been made just minutes before. I stared at those prints, each large footprint, no doubt belonging to an adult. Steady steps, full of confidence, like someone who clearly knows their direction. But why come all the way to my window? I took a few steps back, trying to calm down, but the cold in the room seemed to be invading every cell in my body. There seemed to be no sign that the person was still nearby, but those footprints led straight to where I was standing. I walked closer to the window again, my eyes still glued to the footprints, and then I noticed something strange. There were no footprints coming back. They just walked towards my window, then suddenly disappeared. A cold feeling, not from the weather, but from an inexplicable presence, enveloped me. I returned to the room and looked at the bathroom mirror, where the bright light from outside shone in, making me feel the presence of something watching me. But when I looked, I only saw my own image, nothing strange. What did I do to deserve this? I wondered, feeling like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Everything was so quiet, so silent, just the sound of the rain and my feet moving across the room. Suddenly, I heard a slight noise, almost imperceptible, but enough for me to turn around. A small click came from behind me, from the bedroom door. I quickly turned around and looked towards the door, but there was no one. Everything remains the same. Was I too worried? Am I figuring it all out? I tried to convince myself that it was just stress from a long night, but as soon as I turned away, I felt someone's eyes in the mirror. It's not me. It was a different image, a faint shape that passed my face in the mirror, then immediately disappeared. I hurriedly turned around again, but there was nothing. There was no one in the room, just me and the empty walls left. But no, I can't forget the footprints. Footprints in the mud. Someone came, and someone passed my window. I walked outside, trying not to look down at my feet, where the footprints remained, a reminder of what had been and what might be to come. I stopped for a moment, looked around to make sure no one was following me, then walked out the door and quickly went back inside the house. Everything was fine, but I couldn't shake the strange feeling that was covering me. A feeling I can't describe, but it's like there's something that never leaves. Part 19. The Unbreakable Bond. The next morning, I decided to leave the cabin. Not because I'm scared, but because I can't stand it anymore. The footprints are still there, and I don't want to face them anymore. I gathered my things, packed my essentials, and drove out of the area. During the trip, I tried to forget what happened, but every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw faint silhouettes in the reflection. They are like signs, reminding me that it's not over yet. I don't know if I can run away from something that can't be seen, but I won't go back there. But when I got home, the feeling still didn't let me go. Mirrors in the house become the enemy. I can't look at them without feeling uneasy. That feeling was not ordinary fear. It's a feeling of knowing that someone or something is waiting for me behind the glass, always watching and always looking for an opportunity to pull me back. I started throwing away every mirror in the house. Not only mirrors in the bedroom or bathroom, but also small mirrors in the hallway, in the living room. I don't even dare look at them through the phone. But I can't hide forever. When night came, I felt that presence again, like a shadow hovering in the empty walls of the house. And late at night, when I wake up feeling cold, I know that shadow is right near me, just waiting for the opportunity to pull me into its world again. Part 20, Last Call. Apartment 511 is empty. That room hasn't changed at all since I broke in. There was only silence and thick darkness. I sat there in the middle of the bedroom where my bed would be and waited. Time no longer seems important. Everything around me was covered in a layer of dust, empty and cold. But in that moment, I knew something was going to happen. I've been sitting there since evening, waiting for something to change. As darkness enveloped the room, I felt tension in the air. Suddenly, from below, I heard a knock on the door. Not far away, but right below me from my apartment, from where I used to sleep. Knocks rang out in the darkness, each one by one, clearer and stronger than ever. It was as if someone was standing right below me, waiting to do something. I was startled, my eyes opened wide, looking around. There was no one, but the knocking continued, without stopping. That's when I realized it wasn't just someone knocking, but a message, a call from the darkness. Those sounds were not simply noises that I thought they were. They are signs, an invitation for me to turn around and face the fear that I have always avoided. The tapping stopped, but there was not silence. I stood up, my hand shaking as I touched the door handle of apartment 511. I opened the door, and the first thing I saw was darkness, deep black. There was no one, just strange silence, but I felt some presence. I entered the room, but nothing changed. Everything remained the same, just white walls, dust stains, and eerie silence. Suddenly, a strange sound rang out from below, a creaking noise, as if someone was moving in the dark. I turned around, staring at the empty room, but I knew something was wrong. That feeling, something invisible but very close. A shadow was passing in my sight, moving quickly and fleetingly. I couldn't stop looking, but every time I turned around, the darkness drifted away, leaving no trace. At this point, I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I turned my back on the room and walked quickly toward the door. But then, another noise rang out from behind, making me turn around. There was a knock on the door, this time clearer than ever, like an affirmation. I quickly walked out of the room, then turned around and locked the door. But when I looked in the hallway mirror, I saw something unbelievable. My shadow, the reflection in the mirror, is no longer mine. His eyes stared at me, but it wasn't me. It was a strange image, like a shapeless shadow that wasn't me, but had my eyes, and I felt like it was looking right at me, like it was waiting for me to do something. That feeling made me stop breathing. I walked out of the room, but my eyes still couldn't leave the image in the mirror. It wasn't me, but there was something very familiar about it. That shadow, that image, seems to always follow me, always waiting. Part 21, Invitation from the Darkness. I can't escape this feeling. Every time I think I've left it behind, it comes after me. Now, even after I left apartment 511, I still felt that shadow following me. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a hallucination or not, but every night it comes, knocks on the door, and then disappears into the darkness. I can't stop thinking about it. That shadow, perhaps it is a warning, a reminder that there is something that stays with me from the past, from what I have done and what I do not understand. Maybe I've missed something important, a piece of the puzzle that I haven't realized yet. I don't know if I can run away forever, or if I finally have to face that shadow. But every night, when I lie down, I feel like it's getting closer. In just a second, I will have to understand what happened. Part 22, Traces from the Past. At this moment, I was sitting in the car, filled with confusion and fear. The photos I had just found in an old storage box seemed unbelievable, and I couldn't get them out of my head. The short hair of the man in the photo is identical to mine. The brown jacket is identical to the one I bought from the vintage store not too long ago. This cannot be a coincidence. A cold feeling enveloped me as I realized that I was facing something beyond my understanding. The photos in my hands, the traces that I couldn't explain, they were painting a complete picture that I didn't want to see. I became more confused when I discovered that the names, details in the records, and images were all linked together in a way that I couldn't explain. Daniel Thomas Miller, my name, has been written in these documents since 1985. That name, although seemingly a coincidence, cannot escape my mind. How could it appear in such old documents? And why did I feel like there was an inexplicable connection between me and what I found? I decided to stop procrastinating and open up more of the old storage boxes. I found another set of Polaroids, one of which was of a car I had seen, but with a man who appeared to be me at some point I couldn't remember. The feeling of confusion and inexplicability increased, as if a part of me had lived through these events before, but could not remember them. The photo of the man wearing a brown coat, a shirt identical to mine, made me unable to escape this feeling. Why do I see myself in a photo that clearly wasn't taken by me? And why does the name Daniel Thomas Miller continue to appear in these documents? A feeling like someone was watching me, from the past and present, surrounded me. My reason began to falter, unable to understand why I was caught up in such a strange and scary series of events. It seemed like I was finding pieces of a story that I had never lived, but felt strangely familiar. As I continued to rummage through boxes, photos, and documents, I realized that one of the photos had a note on the back. October 15, 1986, 1:45 a.m. This date and time apparently coincide with the time of Thomas Reeves's death at Joey's Elite Diner. But I can't help but wonder, why do I see my name in these photos and documents? Part 23, Dark Roads. As I sit with these mixed documents, images, and memories, I can't help but feel like I'm going down a dark path from which I can't turn back. The name Daniel Thomas Miller, that name is now more than just a coincidence. It seems to be the key to all the mysteries happening around me. Everything seems to have a strange connection which I cannot understand. And then I thought about the times I met that man. Every time, at the same hour, he sat there, in the exact same clothes as me, staring at me but saying nothing. One time, I even tried to touch him, but his body passed by me like smoke, leaving behind an inexplicable cold feeling. I couldn't understand why I felt as if he was waiting for me, as if he was a part of me, or maybe a shadow from the past that I never recognized. And after all of this, I couldn't escape the feeling that that shadow, that man, was not a stranger, but a part of my life. An invisible existence, always present around me, watched my every step, and now I knew that I could no longer avoid my fate. Part 24, Mysterious Passages. When I returned to the deserted forest road, darkness seemed to cover everything. I heard strange footsteps following me, echoing in the quiet space. A cold and uneasy feeling rose up, making me not dare to look back. That strange voice kept echoing in my head, "Hello!" But I can't determine where it came from. I continued walking toward town, trying to ignore a feeling of dread I couldn't explain. The trees were tall. Dry leaves rustled under my shoes as if they were silently watching me. The sun's long shadows shined through, making the scenery around me appear hazy, almost unreal. When I walked through mossy stone walls and forest paths, I felt like I was lost in another world, where time and space no longer followed normal rules. My every step echoed in the empty space, and I began to feel a strange presence around me. I couldn't resist my curiosity, but the more I walked, the more I felt a pull from behind, as if someone was following me, always close but invisible. I stopped, looked back, and called out, "Who is there?" But there was only the wind blowing through the branches, no answer. As I approached the town, I began to notice something strange. There was no one on the streets. All the stores were closed. There was not a soul in sight. At this point, I began to doubt my sanity, feeling like I was dreaming. Everything was so quiet and still. I decided to step into a small restaurant, a place I'd been to a few times before, to find some solace in normalcy. But as soon as I entered, the atmosphere in the shop made me feel cold. The tables and chairs were empty. No one was sitting. Only faint fluorescent lights illuminated a quiet space. I went to the counter, but there was no one standing there. A small, hoarse voice from behind said, "You're late." I turned around and only saw a man sitting in a dark corner of the shop. He was wearing a brown tweed jacket and a red tie, looking like the man I had met before. He stared at me without blinking. "Who are you?" I asked, feeling like I was speaking to a shadow that didn't really exist. But he just smiled, an incomprehensible smile, and his voice said again, "You know it well, Daniel." That name echoed in my head again, making me tremble with fear. I couldn't breathe, as if some invisible force was pulling me closer to him. When I approached, he didn't move or say anything more. The cold feeling from his body made me feel numb. And then, everything suddenly fell silent. I woke up, feeling like I had just woken up from a nightmare. I stood in the middle of the restaurant, my heart pounding, cold sweat pouring down. I don't know if what just happened was actually a dream or not, but one thing is for sure. I can't keep standing here another minute. I left the restaurant, ran out, and got in the car. But the cold still clung to me, and the image of the man in the brown coat was always haunting my mind. It seems I'm being pulled into an inescapable loop, where the past and present blend together, with no way out. I looked in the mirror, trying to find some comfort from myself, but only saw the image of someone who was no longer myself. A person cannot escape the footprints he leaves from the past. And I began to understand that perhaps I was no longer simply me. Helpless as I looked at that letter, the black letters printed on the white page. 3 short sentences, but a clear reminder. "We are waiting for you. Come to us. Don't let us down." This message was like a sharp blade, cutting deep into my mind. Every word, every dot, every comma seems to convey a dark message that haunts me. Up until now, I've tried to ignore the strange images and inexplicable sounds, but now I can't avoid them anymore. The they I met, those machines and creatures, are still haunting me, waiting for my return. I placed the letter on the table, feeling the paper burning hot, forcing me to face the inevitable. The world around me seemed to be twisting, suffocating me in a dark space. The memories of my last encounter with those creatures, of the cold sensations and the cruel machine manipulating my body, all came rushing back, and I realized that they had never left me. A sick feeling rose in my heart as I remembered how, in the past, I had to fight to maintain my sanity, to keep from falling into complete madness. But now everything has changed. I'm not me anymore. My feelings no longer belong to me. Every action, every thought of mine seemed to be controlled by another force. Dark shadows in my mind, blurry, unrecognizable shapes. They continued to move in the dark light of insecurity. I know that I cannot escape them, cannot simply leave what is waiting for me ahead. My hands trembled as I picked up the letter again, my eyes looking at those 3 expressionless lines, as if they were a call from another world. I didn't send the letter, but can I avoid what awaits me? Can I continue to live in this shadow, forever running from what I cannot understand? The answer is not clear. Everything inside me is just a darkness, an endless confusion. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the door from behind, this time not from inside my apartment. It was from another room, one I had never been in. The knocking was steady, as if waiting for me to enter. Once again, I felt my heart clench, and I knew I couldn't refuse. So our story has ended. Hope you feel relaxed and comfortable. If you like this story, don't forget to click like and subscribe to continue accompanying us in mysterious and interesting stories. Wishing you a good night's sleep. Don't forget to leave everything behind and let your soul relax. Good night, see you in the next stories.